Vamos a dar paso entonces a nuestra segunda conferencia. Va a ser vía remota. Nos acompañará Scott Shigeoka y nos va a hablar sobre cómo la curiosidad precisamente puede transformar vidas y cambiar el mundo. Así que vamos a ver si ya está por acá con nosotros el señor Scott Shigeoka.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Scott.
Awesome. Well, hi. I'm so happy to be here. And lo siento, mi español no es bastante para conversar, but so I'm going to do this in English. And I'm so appreciative of the translation team. Should I just jump in or?
Yes, Scott, by all means, and I think everyone's ready. So go ahead. Welcome.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I just wanted to start off with my deep gratitude. I think that the work that you all do in education is the most important thing that came up for me in my own life, and also is one of the most important things that we can do for our world. And so I just want to start with a deep gratitude for each of you for the work you do.
Recording in progress.
I actually wanted to share a personal story. Back in 2017, I actually started to experience auditory hallucinations. I started to hear voices, and they said really dark things to me. They said, you're unlovable, you're a freak, you don't belong here. And they went on and on for days and then weeks and then months. And like most people, I tried to push them away. I tried to, pretend as if they didn't exist. I tried to dismiss them, but they only came back again and again, louder and louder, stronger and stronger. And so I was a very good millennial, I guess. And I went to my therapist, who asked me a really interesting question. He said, "Have you ever tried to get curious about your voices?" And that was a really sort of shocking response for me. And in the US, we'd say a clutch your pearls kind of moment, because I I responded and said, "You want me to get curious about what I fear?" And at first, it didn't make sense to me, but I had a lot of trust with my therapist, and he had really helped me to grow. And so I decided the next time that the voices would come, I would turn towards them with curiosity instead of fear. And what I started to notice is that the voices mirrored what I had been told as a child, what I had even told myself as a child. And what it started to do was my curiosity about what the voices were saying and actually listening to them started to make me more aware of this younger version of myself that was inside of me, that was really yearning for attention and for connection. And that actually started a process of healing for me. And I actually started to love my voices. I started to, recognize these weren't dark forces that I needed to repel or dismiss or ignore, but actually by getting curious towards them, I could learn from them and I could grow. And that actually taught me a lot about my work. So I work at the University of California, Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. And what I do there is I lead research-based explorations, mostly around curiosity and especially around division, the division that we're experiencing not just here in the United States, but it's really divisions all across the world. And what we found is that when you replace your certainty about what you think you know about other people with a curiosity about what you don't yet know or what you might have gotten wrong, that is actually one of the best solutions we have to bridging our divides, to coming together across our differences. And I bring this up on a topic of curiosity, which researchers redefine it as the desire to know or the desire to understand. I bring it up because we often think about curiosity as just an intellectual tool, which is mostly the narrative that we have in education. When I go to K through 12 schools all around the world, it's mostly framed in this intellectual pursuit, reading books and listening to podcasts or learning in this intellectual way. But that's only one form of curiosity. It's actually if we only look at it intellectually, that's too narrow of a view. So I want to offer a perspective that widens our view of curiosity, and what I call this form of curiosity is heart-centered curiosity. It's about bringing curiosity down from the mind and into the heart. And what that does is when we want to understand someone who is sitting across from us, whether we are a student who wants to understand another student, we are an educator who wants to understand our own students, or even fellow educators, that is us practicing heart-centered curiosity. That is about us wanting to know who this person is in front of us. And in the education system, this kind of curiosity actually has tremendous benefits. So if you look at the social science, when we are able to use curiosity as a force for connection by understanding one another, we actually find that well-being increases. So that is at both the student level and also at the education and professional staff level. It also increases engagement and responsiveness. So if you're feeling like I'm not getting as much engagement from my students, actually turning towards them and getting to know who they are as a person and inviting them to do that with each other can increase engagement and responsiveness. And we are also finding in our research that increasing a student's heart-centered curiosity is linked to increased life satisfaction and positive emotions like happiness and joy and awe and hope. And so it really facilitates more than just intellectual learning. We're seeing that it's doing so much more for our students, path. And one other thing that I find really fascinating about this heart-centered curiosity is that it also helps us to interrupt our biases and to interrupt our assumptions of one another. And this happens a lot in schools and in, communities and in society at large, where we are judging people or dismissing people based on, maybe the ways in which they live, the identities they hold that seem to clash with our own, whether that's age or race or economic status. And so by inviting heart-centered curiosity into our classrooms or even into our communities at large, we can actually interrupt these assumptions and reduce the biases that we're seeing in our context. And curiosity is also on a spectrum. So we have shallow curiosity on one side, but on the other end of the spectrum, there's deep curiosity. And we often just talk in a shallow, curious way, where we ask questions like, what is your name? Or what, class are you teaching? Or, where do you live? What community do you live in? What neighborhood do you live in? Or, what is your job? Those are all great questions to get to know people, but they only crack the surface of who a person is.
Ah, no sé qué.
A deep curiosity question might be, tell me about the story of your name. Because asking about the story of your name starts to unveil, who are the relationships in your life that named you, whether that was your parents or grandparents or other folks in your family. What is the cultural aspects of your name? It reveals so much more than just naming who you are. So what is the story of your name is a deep curiosity question. Another example of that, instead of where do you live, which is a shallow curiosity question, you might ask, what does home feel like for you? How do you feel safe in your home? Who are the people in your home that really help you to thrive? So these kinds of questions have a deeper quality to them, and they get underneath the surface of who this person is. In other words, it allows you to dive beneath towards the deep end. And what I say is that deep curiosity allows us to penetrate the layers of a person and reach their soul. And so I'll say that one more time because I think that's really important. Deep curiosity allows us to penetrate the layers of a person and reach their soul. And I really felt this. I went on a road trip in my tiny Toyota Prius for 12 months. And as a progressive queer professor who lived in a very liberal bastion in the San Francisco Bay Area in California, I went out on a road trip for a year. And I went to Donald Trump rallies. And I went to meet with religious leaders. And I lived in small towns for months at a time in the rural South, which are very different cultural contexts from what I was used to from my own adult life. And I practiced this curiosity, this deep curiosity, to really understand who are the people in front of me. So I'll give you an example. When I went to a convent where I met Catholic sisters, and they were living for 6 months with a really diverse group of millennials who had different racial identities and religious beliefs and sexualities. And it was all a part of this effort called Nuns and Nuns. And what they did was they explored topics like belonging and spiritual practice and social justice and racial justice. But what they also did was they spoke about topics like the three vows that sisters take: the vow of chastity, the vow of obedience, and the vow of poverty. And what I heard from one of the millennial residents is that they had a negative connotation at first about what chastity meant. They held assumptions about what that meant to them. They thought it was just a tool to exert power over women or to control their bodies. But because they were very curious, they actually had conversations with these Catholic sisters, and they interrupted those assumptions and biases and expanded their perspective of the vow of chastity. And what they learned, this individual's name is Sarah, what Sarah learned is that the vow of chastity is not what she had initially thought. It was actually so much more than that. It was about care and love and being able to give that to many people beyond just a partner or an immediate family member. So, in other words, she was able to expand her understanding by staying curious and staying in conversations with someone who's very different from her, in this case, a Catholic sister. But the most beautiful part of Sarah's story is that she now does land justice work, and she works with religious communities to think about the land that they've loved for generation and what to do with it. And so what that shows us is that curiosity isn't just an intellectual tool where we learn things, it is actually a force for connection. She made real relationships with Catholic sisters that lasted, so much so that she is now doing incredible and important, meaningful work with them. And so curiosity is not just about intellectual learning, it is a force for real human relationships and connection. I'll give you another example, and then I'll share this in the context of classrooms. But I just want to do these broad examples because I do think that they're important. I went to a Trump rally and I saw this sea of red of attendees who are very different from my political view. And I went up to different attendees and I spoke to them and I asked them questions and I was genuinely interested in who they were. And what happened was really beautiful. They actually, because they were being asked questions, they were not put on the defensive, and they started to get curious about me and ask me questions. And I got to share a little bit about the road trip I was doing and my research and curiosity. But I was also wearing a particularly fabulous outfit that day, and I didn't, hide or erase what made me different. I shared stories of my queerness and stories that they had never heard before from someone like me. And what we know from the social science is that when we are curious towards a person, it is more likely that they will be curious towards you. And that creates collective learning and shared learning in both directions. And so I bring that up because, when we start to model curiosity as educators with our fellow teachers or with the students in our classroom or with the staff that we work alongside, we're creating what's called a culture of curiosity, which motivates and inspires other people around us to also get curious, to also ask questions, to also turn towards the people around them and to get curious about who they are as a person. And through all of this, research that I've been doing over the past few years, the book that I wrote on the power of curiosity called Seek, which is available around the world, I learned something really beautiful actually about love. And I'm actually going to bring in the L word, love, amor, because I think it's actually crucial to the work that we do in the field of education. I found that one of the best ideas I've seen about how we can love better is for us to practice curiosity. Because when we are curious, we say, I want to know who you are. I want to understand you better. I want to know about your upbringing, about your family, about what interests you in the world, about what you aspire to be, about your dreams, about your fears. I want to see the nuance of who you are. And what curiosity says is, I want to know these things about you, not because I want to change you or change your beliefs or fix anything about you. I do this because I care about you and because I love you. And so that is the true promise of curiosity, and bringing that into all of the spaces we're in, whether that's in our own families, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our communities. It is really about, creating a culture of curiosity, a culture of care, and really a culture of love. But more so than that, giving students the opportunity to have curiosity as a skill set. It is a muscle. It is something just like in our body where we are born with it, but we have to exercise it every day and we have to build these muscles up, right? I don't go to a gym and expect to, bicep curl, 50-pound weights on my first day. I have to start smaller, right? So the same is true for curiosity. We have to start small with the people around us and work our way up in our practice and build that muscle of curiosity. And when we begin to do that, we give students the opportunity to see the good in the world and in their lives and not just focus on what is bad, or in our societies or in our workplaces or in our schools, to see how we're coming together, how we're unifying, not just how we're fracturing or coming apart. And the other promise of curiosity is that it reminds us to prioritize questions and to see the power of our questions as crucial and critical for solving problems in our own lives and in the world. Sometimes we over focus on finding or delivering the answers, especially in schools and especially in workplaces. So, how do we use curiosity to explore the kinds of questions that we're asking and what makes a question powerful? I actually, when I go to schools, I invite students to share what are the most powerful questions you've heard. I ask my fellow colleagues, fellow educators, what are powerful questions that allowed you to feel seen or that allowed you to feel really excited about the work you're doing, and to actually catalog those questions, write them down, and have them in your tool belt, just like you would the answers to the questions. And so I just, want to sort of add some nuance and some texture and some color to this conversation that we're having. I heard the past conversation in the gathering, which I thought was so fantastic, around curiosity and innovation and our imagination. And I want to just nuance that by saying that it is also about this heart-centered pursuit, about how we get to know one another as people, how we create those spaces and those containers for us to have real conversations, to learn about how our experiences and how our life stories are different from one another. And by doing that, we're actually giving our students all of the benefits of curiosity, just like they would if they were motivated to read a book or to listen to a podcast. So that's another way that you can think about curiosity, is opening up those spaces for heart-centered connection and conversation to get that increased well-being, to increase the purpose that they feel in life, to promote engagement and responsiveness, to help increase their life satisfaction and increase their positive emotions inside and outside the classroom. And it's not just for our students also. It is for us. It is for us as educators, for us to practice in our own personal lives, in our own professional lives, with the people around us. Because when we model that, we know from the social science that that gives us the best chance at inspiring others to also be curious. And so if we want to create a school and a culture where we love one another and we create a sense of belonging, where people are not othered for their differences, and we invite people in an inclusive way that encourages them to learn and to explore, then we have to get curious. We have to inspire this heart-centered curiosity amongst our students, amongst our educators, and amongst everyone else in our lives. So I will end it there. I wasn't initially going to share that personal story, but I wanted to share the story of the voices because I thought that was important to also demonstrate how we can move from fear to curiosity. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. They're going to be translated to me in English so that ensure that I understand them correctly. But again, I'm so grateful for this time, and I hope you're feeling energized and inspired and feeling new possibilities about how to bring curiosity into your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Yes, we sure are. We sure feel energized. And we're going to open up the questions now. Gracias, Scott. Vamos entonces a abrir la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Así que, por favor, quien quiera levantar la mano. A ver, aquí en medio.
Oh. There? Hi, Scott. First of
Hello.
all, thanks a lot for your fresh perspective. It's really great. It's real inspiring, and your energy overall, it's something that I would like to take to my classroom with me. First of all, thank you very much. I have a question, especially regarding the students with low confidence, low self-esteem. They're not that open. They are limited by their own mind. Do you have any advice? Have you had any students like this?
Yes. So, there's a lot of reasons. Well, first of all, thank you so much for mirroring that. And I love your energy too. And I think you're already bringing such great energy into your classroom just based on the way that you show up and the way you ask that question. I think this is a really great question. One of the things that I've learned is that there are real reasons for why we were held back from being curious, that we should remember, that our students are going through. And there's 4 key speed bumps. One is fear. Sometimes fear holds us back from being curious. One is trauma. So when we go through traumatic experiences, what clinicians have found is that it becomes harder for us to become curious. Another is time. Some people think, I don't have the time to get curious. I have all these other things to focus on. And the fourth is distance. Sometimes we just don't have the opportunities to get curious, that we're not put into the context or the environments where our curiosity could actually be piqued. And so here's what I would say to students who have lower confidence is that remember that where they're coming from first. And one of the clinicians told me that curiosity is a barometer for healing. So I think that as educators, there's so many jobs and hats that we have to wear. In addition to educating students, we are also holding space for them to grow emotionally and personally. And sometimes we want a student that we're working with to heal from the maybe negative experiences that they've had in their household or in their lives, so that they can find their voice and find confidence within themselves. But by getting them slowly curious, what you are actually doing is helping them to get on a path of healing, which will slowly make curiosity and confidence easier for them. So first, remember that directions of curiosity. So I'm talking a lot about outward curiosity. How do I get curious about someone else, about another culture, about the world that's around us? But sometimes for students, it might be easier for them to get inwardly curious, to get curious about themselves, their interests, their purpose, their families, their relationships, what they get excited about, as a first step to building that muscle of curiosity before you get them into a conversation where they're practicing curiosity with others. Another direction is the beyond. So that's how do we get curious about what's not in the physical world? So that might be consciousness, it might be the divine or God, it might be those who have died who are no longer with us, or those who are not yet born. And so that's another direction that you could invite their curiosity towards. You could have them really explore, questions or philosophies of spirit, of the divine, of consciousness, of interconnection, of the future, things of that nature. So one thing to think about is there's multiple directions of curiosity. And so if one isn't working for a student with lower confidence, try another direction. The other thing that I would say is that it's not just about asking questions. That's not the only way that we can practice curiosity. There's many other ways that researchers have found we can bring this into our classrooms and into our lives. So I'll give you 2 quick examples. One is through visualization. So professional athletes and Olympians, they will actually close their eyes and envision themselves, running across the 400-meter track, or envision themselves swimming, 100 meters freestyle, or shooting a free throw into basketball. And what researchers, sports psychologists have found is that when you close your eyes and you visualize yourself doing this, athletic performance, it increases your performance. It makes you a better athlete and a better performer. And they found this to be true also in the workplace. But the same is true in schools. So you can actually invite students to visualize what are the ways that they could get curious in their own lives. What questions might they ask, another student? How might they explore about the world around them or the universe that's inside of themselves? So leading them through a visualization where they're not even in conversation with you is one way of getting them to, really nurture this muscle of curiosity. And then another way to do this is the simple question of asking them what vegetable they prefer, which is actually some really interesting research that came out of Mary Wheeler and Susan Fisk, their laboratory, which found that when we think about, does this person like broccoli or carrots, what it does is it interrupts our assumptions and biases about that person because we see them as an individual with their own preferences, their own likes, their own dislikes. So it's not necessarily, that question that you need to ask, like broccoli or vegetables, but you can invite questions of preferences and that show individuality in the classroom. So that might be, who here is more of a mountain person versus a beach person? Who here likes dogs, over cats? These are the kinds of questions that show that there's individuality even in a single group identity. So two people who are, 12 years old, two people who are, Asian descent, two people who are from the same community can have very different preferences and individualities around them, which decreases biases and prejudice in the classroom as well. So kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Scott. Gracias, Scott. Una pregunta más por acá, aquí del lado izquierdo, por favor.
Gracias. Bueno, primeramente, muchísimas gracias. La verdad es increíble lo que estoy escuchando y lo que todos estamos escuchando acá. Me gustaría mucho poder preguntar sobre la pena. Normalmente hay muchos niños, cuando yo era chiquita, siempre me daba mucha pena levantar la mano. ¿Qué podría hacer desde el amor y desde todo lo que propone para poder ayudar a estos niños que tienen mucha pena siempre para las preguntas?
Oh, okay, so Scott, she would like to know what you think would be the best way to address this aspect of shame and sometimes embarrassment that comes with asking questions, or even, the simple task of getting up every morning and going to school that some children, face. What would be your advice in that regard?
Yeah, so we know from the research that when we are curious, we actually release dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that is sometimes called the happy hormone. And so what that means is that when we are curious, when we are exploring, we feel really good. And dopamine is the same thing that is released when we eat a tasty meal, when, we have, intercourse, when we are feeling connected to a community. These are all things that are really crucial for our survival, but also for us to really engage with the world. And, what dopamine does is it wants to reward those positive behaviors that are helpful for survival. It wants to reward those behaviors that might not only increase our likelihood of surviving, but also give us, our best sort of experience of humanity. And so I think it's really important to remember that when you're creating a space of curiosity for your students to explore questions, to explore their own interests, it is going to make them feel good. And over time, it will create a habit. We know this from when you are trying to work out in a gym. What they say is the heaviest weight in the gym is the front door, because sometimes we are not always motivated to get to the gym. And so I think the same kind of mentality is helpful when we're thinking about curiosity, that there might be some moments when our students are very engaged around exploration and about curiosity, and they want to get through that front door to work out the muscle. And other times they're kind of not feeling it like we would. Sometimes I don't want to go to the gym, like that's not something that, is as exciting to me. But if we can sometimes facilitate that by, creating accountability, by, pairing people up to, encourage that behavior or modeling it ourselves. Oftentimes what happens is we go to the gym, we work out, and then we're so glad we did it. We feel so good after we do it, even if we had a little bit of resistance getting to that front door. The same is true for curiosity too. Sometimes you might be feeling a bit of resistance, but know that when they finally go through the experience, they will naturally release dopamine, they will naturally feel good, and they'll make a connection between this behavior and something that is serving me and my life. And so I think that's a really, really helpful way of thinking about this work.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Okay, we have one last question. Tenemos una pregunta más. Una manita alzada por ahí, por favor. Alguien que tenga... Aquí del lado derecho, entonces.
Hi, Scott. My question is regarding, as a teacher, how can you make persons or students that are not engaged with your topic or even with the school? We have students that are in rural areas that have so many problems, and probably one of them is to go to the school. So with these problems, how we as teachers can make them curious, can make them to be more to learn in a better way, even the problems that they are facing, to be more empathic with them, and how in our role can make better persons and to have better communications with them. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question and a great one to end on. I think, a great analogy to think about for this question is, I often say, just because you're curious about someone's hair, about their culture, about whether they're pregnant or not, it does not mean that you're entitled to that information, right? That your curiosity is earned, it is not deserved. So what I mean by that is that we have to build trust and a relationship with the person that is across from us that we are getting curious about. Because again, curiosity is earned, it is not deserved. And I think that's helpful when thinking about this work, because we sometimes want a really immediate shift to happen, or we desperately want to create this engagement and responsiveness in our classroom. And we're also trying to do that while holding all the many responsibilities in our professional and personal lives. And I think it's important to remember a great quote from Bayo Akomolafe, who's a philosopher, which is, "The times are urgent, so let us slow down." He says, "The times are urgent, so let us slow down." I think it is so important to bring in pause, to bring in, to slow down, to bring in more trust, to build a relationship over time, and to trust that by doing that, you are actually going to elicit the curiosity of the student who is in front of you. And so one way that you can continue to do that day by day is to practice your own curiosity, because that's what you have control over, your own reservoir of curiosity, to practice your own curiosity towards those students, to be interested in their lives, to be interested in who they are, to ask them those deep curiosity questions, even if you feel afraid to, because you're not sure how they're going to respond to it or whether they're going to really understand, to really just have the courage to ask those deeply curious questions. Because what I've often found from educators is that when they do, that student feels so appreciated, so valued. They were waiting for someone to ask them these questions that go beneath the surface, that go deeper. And so to start getting into your own practice towards your students to build that trust, to build that relationship, which allows, curiosity to really grow and to really thrive. And to know that it is a slow process and it can be a slow process, and, to take the mantra of Io come lafe, the times are urgent, so let us slow down. That, sometimes slowing down the process, seeing this as something that we have to build over time, over a relationship, can really help us do this work in the best way possible. I'm so grateful for each of you. Seriously, thank you so much for all that you do. I would love to hear from you. My information is all online, and I'm so open to having connections and contacts with you. And this is my favorite kind of sort of venue to talk in. I just did a TED Talk a couple of days ago, but I still think these venues with educators, well, even with a TED Talk, is always my favorite venue to have these kinds of conversations and share this kind of insight and wisdom. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you. And thank you to everyone for bringing me into this amazing gathering.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Un aplauso, sí.